The Hungarian Soviet Republic was a socialist state that existed briefly in modern-day Hungary from March to August 1919. Despite its short duration, the republic had a significant impact on the country's history and left a lasting legacy. In this alternative history scenario, let's explore what might have happened if the Hungarian Soviet Republic had managed to survive, and how it could have survived. First and foremost, the republic's survival would have required overcoming several significant challenges. Here are the reasons why it fell. The state's economic situation was dire, with a bankrupt treasury, a failing currency, deteriorating industries, low support from the countryside, low soldier morale, war exhaustion from the Great War. Also, the government was plagued by internal strife, with various factions vying for power, as Belokun himself came into power to betraying the Social Democrats. On top of that, the Allied powers would most likely have attempted to overthrow the Republic, as it did in our timeline. Besides those issues, the Hungarian Soviet Republic made multiple blunders. The very first one would be releasing Slovakia. The military that fought the Battle of Belokun were still hoping that the government would bring back Greater Hungary that was present in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Unfortunately, it seemed that Belokun believed in communism a bit too much, so instead of adapting it practically, he tried to follow it to a T by establishing the Slovak Soviet Republic. A compromise to survive could be reached, where Slovakia becomes that of a Soviet Socialist Republic of the USSR within Hungary, with the intent of not making the Hungarian population too mad, also throwing a bone to the Slovaks. The next move would be to ignore the demands of the Entente to withdraw. You see, the Hungarian Red Army did withdraw from this area, and the Romanian forces did not pull back. So either they have to make some sort of compromise when it comes to withdrawing. For example, Romania leaves first before Hungary, or if the Romanians attack the Dutch and Hungarian lines, the Hungarians could try to bleed the Romanians dry in a war of attrition. It will be extremely difficult, but with a bit more support from the army, they could maybe hold out until the end of 1919, and later before the Soviets could get into Poland. What also would have helped is to tone down the terror and tie the screws a bit on establishing the dictatorship of the proletariat, for now at least, to make the conservative countryside hate the government a little bit less. Still, they would have to extract some extra food from them to keep the war going. Now, this could go two ways. Romania retreats from the lines, and they get to keep Slovakia. This could be a big threat to Europe, as the Hungarians could provide support to the Red Army, who was invading Poland, thus massively increasing the chance that the RSFSR would win the Polish-Soviet War. Once that is done and dealt with, the floodgates for communism would spread into Europe, with the Soviets along with the Hungarians gaining access to the weakened Germany. The Entente won't sit idle in this situation, as they'd intervene on the side of the Germans to salvage Europe from the Red Horde. In such a hypothetical war, the communists would likely lose, as they are already on their last legs during their respective civil wars, with the Kronstadt rebellion being a sign of this. I believe they would not be able to finish off the more industrialized and powerful Entente who, at the very least, didn't have a population that resented their guts. Though, before we continue to the other scenario, like and subscribe, share the video, and check out the Patreon that's linked in the description, along with other social media. Now, let's get back to the video. So, for example, Romania would withdraw from the Hungarian Soviet Republic, along with the Czechs after a stalemate ensued. With the fact that the Hungarian Soviet Republic survived, the Entente would assist Poland against the Soviets a bit more compared to our own timeline, and would threaten the Hungarians with an invasion in case they intervene on the Soviet side. The Hungarians would likely sit this one out, considering that the Soviets could crush the Poles on their own. At best, maybe they could provide some logistical support. It would not be enough, as the Poles would have a more spectacular victory against the RSFSR, pushing them back like in our own timeline. The Peace of Riga would be signed, with the Poles securing the same parts of Belarus and Ukraine that they gained in an original treaty. From now on, the Hungarian Soviet Republic would have to consolidate power. They would up the Red Terror somewhat, as it was the staple for radical left states in this time period, including the Bavarian Soviet Republic. Speaking of the Bavarian Soviet Republic, some communist members from that country would flee to Hungary to escape persecution by the German government and Freikorps. The Hungarian Soviet Republic would enact radical social changes that weren't particularly popular, such as education, healthcare, and labor laws, as the government would try to create a more egalitarian society. Women's rights would have been a particularly significant focus, with the introduction of policies such as gender parity in the workplace and improved access to education and healthcare. Besides that, they'd have to deal with the dumpster fire of an economy that they have. A surviving Hungarian Soviet Republic would most likely implement extensive economic reforms to revive its economy. The country's nationalization and collectivization efforts would have likely continued, as the government strived to address its financial woes. In addition, the Republic would have pursued closer ties with the Soviet Union, which would have opened up new markets for Hungarian exports. Besides that, they could copy the Soviet new economic policy to stimulate the war-ravaged economy. With how much Billy Kuhn believed in communism, it wasn't likely he'd implement the new economic policy, but since the Soviets are the head honcho of communism, the Hungarians would be pressured to adopt it. Perhaps he would even see positive results in the RSFSR and want some of that for himself. Hungary would also industrialize, but not as quick as the Soviets, since they would have a better start compared to them. They had slightly better industry, agriculture, and a literacy rate. So it was very viable for them to take a slightly less insane path of industrialization. On a side note, a brain drain of sorts would happen due to the new government, so Hungary would lose a few intellectuals here and there. After Lenin's death, Stalin would come to power like in our own timeline. It is likely that he will try to control the Hungarian Soviet Republic down the line, trying to assassinate key ministers and even Billy Kuhn himself potentially. The relations between the two would sour, but the two countries would still cooperate when it needed to. Once the Great Depression hit, the Hungarians would attempt to fund communist revolutions in their neighbors, such as the Czechs, Austrians, Romanians, and Yugoslavs. This was completely different compared to USSR's socialism and one-country policy. These revolutions would mildly shake the other country's stability, but they would not have the desired effect of flipping them to communism. The Great Depression would hit these two far-left states, so their economies prospered somewhat. While the political purges, oppression, and other authoritarian measures would hurt the country, Hungary would still have a decent literacy rate, agriculture, and a good industry. Two communist states would cause the Nazis to come into power in 1933 like in our own timeline, since not only the Germans would experience such a red scare, but also Western Europe. The Nazis would be accepted by the Western powers a bit more on this timeline, with most events going similar like they did in our own universe. The Germans would get Austria and the Czechs, who are tired of the Hungarian Soviet Republic's antics. The Poles would be in an even worse position compared to our timeline, since they're surrounded by Germany in the west, Soviets in the east, and commies in the south. They will still try to get close with the Entente, since the Western powers helped them in the Polish-Soviet War. World War II would still begin after the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, but Hungary would be involved there somewhat. Germany defeats Poland and splits it with the USSR, allowing the Hungarians and Soviets to have a common border for the first time in almost 20 years. Later, the Phony War begins, the Soviets stumble and win the interwar, while the Germans begin to fight France. Once Hitler defeats the French, the Soviets would annex the Baltic states, and here is where it gets interesting. Romania, besides losing Bessarabia and Dobrich, would lose less land compared to our own timeline to the Hungarians, as Hitler just wanted to keep the communists somewhat happy for now, though he didn't trust them. The Germans would still invade Yugoslavia in 1941 and help Italy with Greece, this whole Balkan escapade taking slightly longer to finish due to the fact that there is no spearhead from the Hungarians. Barbarossa would still begin, but perhaps in early July. Besides the Soviets, the Axis would also have to defeat the Hungarians, which they managed to do so rather handily, as they are surrounded on all sides. A puppet regime would be put in Hungary, while the country would be somewhat divided and Slovakia gained independence. The Germans would, unfortunately, begin to genocide the Hungarians like they did with the Poles. Due to this, the Magyars would begin to form a partisan movement, that of the Soviets and Yugoslavs, as being under communism is better than being wiped out completely. It will be difficult to pull off, as Hungary has mostly flat terrain compared to the mountains and hills of Yugoslavia. Meanwhile, Germany does less well on the Eastern Front, stopping like 70 kilometers from Moscow before being pushed back even more. The reinforcements that were used in Hungary would be utilized to drive for the Caucasus like in our own timeline, as well as Stalingrad commencing along with the drive for the Baku oil fields. The Axis would have less members on the front, meaning that they gain less land in our own timeline, being pushed back with slightly more ease. The rest of the war will continue as normal, with the Germans being defeated 2 months sooner than our own timeline, leading to the Soviets gaining slightly more territory from the Germans. Post-war Europe would look similar to our own, yet Hungary gets to keep Slovakia and the piece of Romania they acquired. The Bavarian Soviet Republic will also be created as the Soviets get a slightly bigger occupation zone. Since Hungary liberated a good chunk of itself like the Yugoslavs, they will be a bit more free compared to other communist countries, so they will be in a fairly similar position to Yugoslavia, though they will not be completely free. Hungary would be likely to join the Warsaw Pact once it forms, but I don't see them staying in it. Even if they do stay, the Soviets could make some concessions to the Hungarians. The Cold War would go on without a fuss, as the communists would lose eventually, perhaps a year or two later. Hungary would also have its communist government toppled, then becoming a democracy of sorts. Unlike the painful breakup of Yugoslavia, Hungary would have a peaceful splitting with the Slovaks via referendum, while Slovakia would keep its eastern territories. They would also lose some territory to Hungary due to that land having a Hungarian majority. In summary, Hungary would end up with more territory compared to our own timeline and perhaps have a slightly better economy, but their populations would be smaller due to German genocide of World War II. Hope you enjoyed the video, thank you for the view. And I'll see everyone else I plan on doing.